Hello, this is the second video which you are seeing now with my cat, who has now knocked the screen, where I'm going to give you feedback on the discussion questions about James Madison and Patrick Henry. Madison's main argument can be summed up in his famous phrase, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." What he means by that is he doesn't have an idealistic view of human nature. He doesn't believe in that idea of republican virtue that was popular in the revolution. He believes that people are ambitious, and you can use that ambition to make sure that no one man and no one branch of government gets ahead. He basically says if you make the three branches of government attractive to people for advancement, all people will want to defend their branch against the other branches. For example, if you achieve advancement through the judiciary, you're going to want to defend the judiciary against the executive and the legislature. He also argues that the legislature is likely to gain a lot of power. The legislature means Congress in the case of the United States. And this is one of the fears of the anti-federalists, that a strong federal government will take away power from the people and the states. And he argues that the legislature is itself split into two branches, the Senate and the House of Representatives, which will also cancel one another out. So this is why he sees the balance of power as sustainable, not because he's an idealist, but because he's a realist. On the other side, you see Patrick Henry, who is arguing to the state of Virginia that they should reject ratification of the Constitution. He argues that the Constitution will allow the government too much power. He states, without ever quite explaining how and why he thinks this, that people will lose their liberty to this new strong federal government. He says, for example, that he fears that other countries won't honor their treaties and alliances with the United States because they made them with the old Constitution, with the United States under the Articles of Confederation, and why should they respect treaties made when there's a new constitution in place? He fears a French-style government. It may be a little surprising to see someone who's fought in a revolution against Britain to praise the British system, but the revolutionaries saw themselves for the most part as acting in that tradition of British liberty, of liberty guaranteed by Parliament. They merely saw King George and the British Parliament as becoming too powerful and actually breaking the British traditions of liberty. The French system at that time, this is before the Revolution, was an absolute monarchy, and Henry fears too much admiration for the French system. He also talks about slavery. He's quite open in his fear that slavery will be abolished if the federal government has too much power. He's coming from Virginia, a slave state. He worries that the northern states, which there were not technically free states in the 19th century sense of being states that had abolished slavery, but they were states without much slavery, and many or most were on the way to abolishing slavery in the early years of independence. He fears that with a strong federal government, they can outvote the southern states and abolish slavery, or even worse, in Henry's eyes, arm the slaves in the US Army. They could then rebel and take away the land and perhaps the lives of the slave owners. Henry also stands up for the idea of the state rather than the people. He says, what right does Congress have, does the convention have, rather, to say we the people rather than we the states? This brings me to my third question, which was about what issues are being addressed in this debate. Well, here we see the federalist and anti-federalist sides staked out. Madison, as well as Jay and Hamilton, is arguing in the Federalist Papers for ratification, whereas Henry clearly is arguing against ratification. Henry puts his finger on the issue of states' rights, which will be a major issue in the 19th century, ultimately in collaboration with the issue of slavery, leading to the Civil War and the breakup of the Union. Slavery was closely linked to the idea of states' rights because, as we saw with Henry, he fears that a government strong enough to overrule the states will also be strong enough to take away slaves from the slave owners.